Hello, Brian here. I am going to show you how to use this. I'm doing this in Ableton, but you can use any digital audio workstation to do this as long as it has a few very simple features, which all of them do. So whether it's Reason, Logic, Pro Tools, Cubase, Reaper, any of the major any DAW should be able to do this. I'm going to show you what I know as phase EQing, and phase EQing is essentially using audio engineering, to create, to use EQs creatively to get really strange tones or timbre out of stuff, and also to either eradicate or select certain things from a source point of audio. Now, firstly, what I'm going to explain to you is that I've got two tracks here. Dry Session Kit, which is a drum loop. This is a drum loop here. And Dry Session Kit. These are exactly the same. So that's the same loop, the same kit. Everything is the same. So ignore these faders here. But gain is set to the same. So the same gain on each bit. And also both of these tracks are mono. So this might work in stereo, but I'm going to do it in mono just to show exactly how it works. So in that, I've got in Ableton, there's a utility plugin that allows you to do a few things: set gain, set balance. This is in channel, not at the end. So Ableton here, all these controls here are post effects. These are actually in line. So wherever you put this utility plugin, which as you can see in my line, that's the source, that's the utility. It's the first one. So I'm making it mono. So I've got mono on, and I've got this one. I've inverted the phase of the left and right. Now, you could just say you could have just a mono phase button, but Ableton doesn't work like that. Some of them will just have one of these phase invert switches. Some DAWs will have two. And so I've got a utility, and then I've got an EQ. At the moment, I haven't introduced any EQ changes. On the duplicate track, it's exactly the same. Everything is exactly the same, including the source. I've got the utility plugin and I've got the EQ. But on this one, as you'll see, I don't have phase inverted on the left and right channel output channels. So that's very important. So if I do, I'm going to play you what happens when I press play with phase. The phase is matching on each. The polarity is matching on each channel. Okay, so we hear quite a strong signal of that drum loop. On my main output, what I do have, just for purposes to make it easy for everyone to hear, I've got a limiter set to maximize. This is just so the audio comes through, because sometimes these things can be quite quiet and it doesn't transfer well on video unless we've got a bit of output boosted. But this isn't boosting output only, this is actually maximizing, so we're reducing the dynamic range. But anyway, that's another lesson for another time. Anyway, so I've got, at the moment, both channels are the polarity is exactly the same. So now if I take the polarity off and invert the phase of channel 2, you should, and this should be evidence that maths works. Okay, so we see the same signal coming out of channel 1 and the same signal coming out of channel 2. However, we know that the polarity is inverted on one channel. Therefore, outside our master channel, our master bus, whatever we want to call this, there is nothing, zero. So immediately, this can cause problems. I've had this causing issues with recording stereo sources and people using inputs on their interfaces or mixers and then not knowing what the invert phase thing does and pressing invert and then getting really weak signal. And you'll understand why that happens when I introduce some changes to the EQ. As you'll notice, on each of these, I have an EQ8 on each channel as well. That's very important. So when you put things in line, when you're doing phase EQing for this, there needs to be exactly the same amount of plugins on each channel due to a thing called delay compensation. And well, whether you've got delay compensation or not in your DAW, if you don't have exactly the same signal going through, then you might actually introduce phase differences, and that will cause this process and this technique not to work. So it has to, both channels that you're duplicating have to be exact duplicates. So in either channel, it doesn't matter which one, I can start to introduce some EQ. So I've got a low shelf EQ, and as soon as I start to introduce either a negative, so a cut, I'm actually starting to get audio, which if you're into using these EQs in a standard way, that's actually really strange, right? But this is why we're doing that. I'm showing you this because actually, so if I listen to this and then I listen to this, I think most people will notice that there's essentially the same thing coming through, and that's due to phase cancellation of the two channels. But using it creatively to actually aid some kind of selective. So I can use a shelf or a sweep. Cool, nothing new there. That's just an EQ filter sweep, whatever. But if I use an EQ that has more precise bands and resonance cue point, then this actually is where this process of phase EQing becomes really, really, really cool, because I can take any source audio. So it doesn't matter that I'm using a drum loop at the moment. This is just for demonstration purposes. I can take any noise. So I can take anything that, as long as it's the same and it's in mono and one side's inverted and the other isn't, I can actually select frequencies. So I'm going to put a really tight cue point or a really, really tight resonance. And I'm going to select, let's go for something really frustrating so you'll hear it. Let's go for 1K because 1.4 that'll do. Okay. So you can hear that, right? Now if I reduce the resonance or cue point, so actually what I'm doing here is I'm picking a frequency. So you can use this creatively for like actual sound design, or if you've got like audio that you have problematic issues with, and there's only certain things you want in a source point of audio. So I can go, oh, cool, I really like that resonance, or that band of what's in here, and I'm going to introduce another one, and I'm going to take that, make that a little bit tighter than it was. So now that's what I've got. That's the sum of what I've got. But if I turn this EQ off, I don't have anything. That tells me two things. It tells me that Ableton has delay compensation written into its code, which is great. And it also tells me that my signal isn't being interrupted because this EQ doesn't have anything present. There's no settings, but this one does. So let me select another couple bands just so we've got. But can you hear the difference there? There's more resonance that side than that side, and that I can't explain. I'm sure someone with brains will be able to do that. But what this is really useful for is actually carving out really tiny bits of sound that you like. I'm being very, very precise with creative filter sweeping. And let's introduce just a little high shelf. There we go. Turn that on. So what I'm actually doing here is I'm not cutting away, I'm actually adding, or like precisely carving out, or using these EQs, these different bands of EQ filtering. I'm actually carving out what I want, not what I want to take away. So it's not this, but it does sound like additive rather than subtractive. And yeah, that for me is the first lesson in phase EQing that I think anyone would ever need to learn. Thank you.